Happy New Year, Chris.
Anthony,
We're almost there.
We are very, very close. It is New Year's Eve. Anthony, what is your New Year's resolution?
I'm going to start a podcast.
Let me know how it goes. Anthony, Thomas Lipton once relied on over-the-top stunts to differentiate his humble tea brand. Competitors mocked his attention-grabbing tactics until he turned them into a global phenomenon. His early showmanship proved that strategic messaging can redefine a brand's place in the market. Today, we have a special guest, Anthony. Angelo, I'm going to say, I should have probably asked you this when we were asking. Ponzi? Did I get it right? Ponzi?
You got it right.
Okay, right. Excellent.
No relation.
No relation. It's funny. I go to these networking meetings, and I was in this new one, and I stood up and I said, "Hi, I'm Angelo Ponzi. I'm a wealth manager and financial planner." And I stopped and I watched their eyes start to pop. It was very funny.
To the 4 people that got the joke, it was incredible. But yeah, so you are a fractional CMO at Kraft. You thrive on research-driven marketing, brand strategy, and leadership, and your playbook ensures every client stands out, stays on brand, and maximizes result. This is incredible. Angelo, welcome. Thank you for joining us. In today's world, hyper competitive, your ability to stand out as a founder, as a startup, it's so critically important. So, and messaging is the backbone of that, I think.
We lost Chris. Chris, we lost you. So as Chris is figuring out his Wi-Fi, I'll ask, are you there? You're back.
Yeah, I mean, it's hotel Wi-Fi. It's too
All right, see if you get the question out, Chris.
Why does messaging matter? Go.
Well, I find it interesting when I work with companies and they have a lot of horizontal messages, one size fits all. But for me, the importance of it is be able to speak to the individuals on a relevant basis. I need to understand who they are, who you are, in order to communicate. And it's really that simple. If I don't know, who you are, your behaviors, your motivations to do what you do, why am I going to use this service or buy this product? How do I talk to you? And so I tried to simply put it as, I need to understand what motivates you to make a decision. And that's why messaging, for me, is extremely relevant and kind of keeping it, high level, if you will. But, companies that go in with this one size fits all, or a company-centric message versus a customer-centric message. And that's the other area that I find amazing, that, we are great, we're wonderful. Look how long we've been in business. And I literally had a client say, we've been in business 65 years. That's our selling point. And I said, but I just did your research on your competitors, and they've been around for, 57 years and 58. Nobody cares. It's a reason to believe, not a reason to buy. You did something right for 58 or 65 years. What are you going to do for me going forward? And
congratulations.
And they hate to hear that, that's the truth.
You've run a 60-year-old shitty company. It does not mean, I mean it. I want to address this right off the bat, because there's a conventional wisdom and a narrative that we've heard in the startup world now for a really long time, which is just build a great product. All you need to do is build a great product and service, and that everything else will take care of itself. You don't need to worry as much about marketing or go to market or messaging. And the reality is that couldn't be farther from the truth, at least in my mind. Address that. Have you seen that? Have you seen that kind of narrative, and have you had to combat that, particularly with early stage companies?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Especially in early stage, right? They take the field of dreams strategy, right? Build it and they will come. And in the most cases, it just fails, because I find, especially with smaller organizations, we as founders, we fall in love with what we've done, what we've created. And at the end of the day, I'm not buying my service. You're buying it. You're buying my product. And so that build it and they will come, it doesn't work. I tell companies, and I'm dealing with some right now that are focusing so much on the product solutions. Like, our product is great, it's wonderful, and we want to market this service. And my point to them was, nobody's going to use it. I guarantee you, because nobody knows who we are. Nobody's going to invest their dollars to utilize this solution if they don't know who we are. And so that it becomes important. It's not a build it. And I think at the end of the day, it's a combination. You certainly have to talk about the value, not the product itself, but the value that you're offering the customers that might use this. But at the same time, you still have to build your brand, right? Marketing is kind of that quick, I'm going to make you aware of me, but building a brand takes time. And so there's that kind of twofold of, what are you trying to do? You're just trying to generate some leads. But again, if I don't know who you are, I'm a little hesitant on jumping in, especially if it's, if it's not a, $2 widget, but if it's, $100,000 project, whatever it happens to be, it gets harder. So I think that's a big mistake that companies make. They fall in love and they don't take the time to do the research. I mentor at one of the universities here, and they assigned me to this company that came up with a subscription shoe business. Interesting. Young ladies, they got to go to prom, they rent the shoes, they wear the shoes, they send them back. My first question was, did you research this product, this idea? And they go, yeah, absolutely. I talked to mom, dad, my sister, my brother, my cousins, and they all said it was a great idea. It failed.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. Anthony, Angelo brings up a really interesting point, and it's one of the things we see with startups a lot, which is this idea that as a startup, I am so in love with what I'm doing that all of my messaging, I don't actually spend the time to do any customer research. I just spend time talking about myself. It's like on the website, you're like, hey, would you like to see pictures of the party we had? Would you like to hear our latest podcast from our CEO, things like that? Have you seen that, Anthony? Is that something that you've witnessed in the startup world? And then B, how do you start to overcome that?
I think it's really ironic that here's the thing. Every single startup founder is a consumer of branding, messaging, marketing. If you're on the planet, you consume it. Yet, for some reason, we can't separate ourselves from the things that work and don't work on us. Right. So if I go to a website and I'm confused about who they are and what they do, if I can't in the first 10 seconds understand what is this thing that you're selling, you got me here, it was expensive to get me here, and I can't understand why I'm here, I bounce. And yet, as a founder, I struggle to communicate effectively in 10 seconds what I do. It's very difficult. It's something that I have to work on and be very conscious of. I used to not be. I used to just do exactly the common mistakes. Talk about me, talk about the product, talk about why it's cool, talk about, I mean, there's one of my favorite stories on messaging frameworks and branding is something that Honda did. And this is 30 years old now, where they were, I think Honda was getting into the motors for fishing boats business. And I think their chief competitor was Yamaha. I might be getting that wrong. And Yamaha's ad was a picture of their motor with all the features and the time it took and their research and all the data. And Yamaha was the de facto standard. And Honda came out, understood their customer really well, put a huge, beautiful picture of their motor, and it just said the art of fishing. And they crushed Yamaha the next year because and I'm not saying that's what you should do about your product, but what they understood deeply is that the people that fish, they're more into the way it makes them feel to fish than it is the tech specs of the motor. So they understood the customer and drafted a message that resonated with the people that they're selling to.
Angelo, it's such a ubiquitous thing that we as founders were so internally focused that we had the hardest time. How do you coach founders to start shifting their mindset? How do we get out of that idea of it's about us when really we know it should be about the customer?
Yeah, well, the hard part is getting them to, frankly, to allow me sometimes to do the work that we need to do, to go out and talk to their customers. And you know, if anything, that's kind of my focus. This is a company, couple stories. So I worked in the wine business for quite some time, and we had this new client who was shifting from, you know, just a name brand to coastal. So they wanted the whole company to become a coastal brand here in California. So our first went, hey, we're heading to the beach. It's coast. We're going to have, you know, all these beautiful people up on the beach and yada, yada, yada. But at the last minute, we went, I wonder what coastal means to somebody else. And so we traveled across the country doing focus groups. And what we found is, you know, if you're in upstate New York or in Michigan, if you're on a lake, coastal means something very different than Southern California. In South Texas, very different than, you know. And we realized we would have made a huge mistake because we were just going on what we thought the gut was, what the client thought they wanted. And what we found that is we had launched that campaign with the original idea, it would have failed miserably. In another one, HVAC company, been around a long time, little bigger products and services. I wanted to talk to their customers. They said, nah, they love us. Don't worry about it. And I convinced them that what's the worst that's going to happen? I'm going to find out that they love you. And then I did. They found out that they did and truly, indeed, love them. However, most of the people that they dealt with, these mechanical engineers and these various engineering companies, were getting ready to retire. They're all 60 plus, every one of them.
Critical piece of information.
The new generation didn't particularly like my client because they didn't have environmentally friendly products. They didn't offer package deals. And so the new crop of engineers, which my client thought, well, then let's go to the old guys and ask the old guys. Well, of course, the old guys wouldn't be there, and they already didn't like what we were offering. And so my point to them was, they were literally a 75-year-old company. I said, if you don't make these changes, you won't be here at 80. And here are some of the things you need to add new product. You need to change your messaging. You need to get into educational programs. And so they really flipped the script in how they communicate and the things that they did to nurture those clients. Otherwise, they were going to be in trouble. Another one, Christmas client, commercial Christmas. First started working with them. Hey, our products are great. They'll bear the snow and the rain, and they'll stay shiny and new, forever. Well, at the end of the day, after doing the research that we did, talking to customers, we flipped it. And so, for example, we sell the malls. So to the mall founder, we're going to help you create memories for your customers. They're going to come here because you're going to have these beautiful decorations. You're going to create selfie stations, and they're going to come back over and over and over again. Why? Because you're creating an experience for them that they'll create these memories and carry them forward. Oh, also our products will. Right. And again, flip the script. The company continued to grow, even stayed steady, if you will, even through COVID. And, this year will be the highest grossing revenue they ever had in their 30 plus years in business.
Nice.
But it was all
by changing position, all by changing positioning.
Correct. Positioning.
So talk a little bit about the difference between positioning and messaging, or is there a difference?
Well, so I look at positioning as how, you want the market to think of you. And that's another thing I look at. How do you think the market perceives you? And then we go into the market and say, how do you perceive that company? And so now we're looking for kind of gaps. If I think you're XYZ and the market thinks you're ABC, you got a problem. And so trying to understand where those differences are. And then ultimately, once we determine here's who you are, here's who you need to be, is this what you really want? Then we need to either look at your competitive base. Those are the people you're really competing with. I love it when they go, these are our competitors, and we do research. They go, you don't compete with these people at all, right? And so at that point in time, then we can kind of say, we're going to shift your positioning. You're going to either target, one or more vertical markets. Look at adjacent markets. How do you roll into a new market? Do you keep the same positioning that you have, or do you need to, become something a little bit new? And so that it's a process to, again, you opened with me in the beginning. It's about taking time to do some due diligence. I'll say research, but due diligence to really understand how you're perceived. We find a lot of times that the companies think they're X, and we go out into the marketplace and, it's not quite the same. So there's that disconnect. And already, how much business are you losing because they think of you something completely different than you think you are?
It's funny. There's a list of 50 startups that I can think of off the top of my head that started thinking they were one thing and ended up being something entirely different. Some of them dramatically different, just based on how the market perceived it. Okay, so here's what I know so far. What I know is first thing I need to do is understand the importance of messaging, understand the importance of making sure that I'm delivering a consistent market into a message into the marketplace. Second thing is, I now know it's really important to focus on customer-centric messaging, not so much the things that I want to talk about myself. I know that I'm excited, I'm very excited about the thing I'm building, but really I need to figure out a way to communicate that value to the customers. So let's get into the how. So how do we do that? You mentioned research, going out and talking to customers. That sometimes is super easy for a neutral third party. It can be harder for the founder to go do that. What do you recommend to a founder that's just starting to think about, how do I deliver messaging to my target market?
Yeah, well, and I agree, of course, they should hire all of us, right? But when they don't always want to do that, the first thing they think about is, I'll just send the sales guy out there and get him. I always think there's bias. One of the things we always factor in doing research is bias. For example, if we were doing customer interviews and the three of us went out and interviewed the customers for a particular client, each one of us, even though we might be using the same questionnaire, adds bias. Just from our tonalities, the way we, what happens, we woke up on the wrong side of the bed, whatever it happens to be. So I always recommend to companies, build a structured, questionnaire, and frankly, have the same person do the interviewing. Don't farm it out. I also recommend that it's not the salespeople. Why? Because they're the ones that are interacting, and a lot of times the information changes just a little bit. It's like, why did we win that business? Price. No.
Yeah, everything's always
everything's price, right?
Yeah.
One of my favorites is, look, I loved your proposal. Everything was fantastic, but your pricing was a little too high. That's why I gave it to somebody else. So it's like, wait a minute. If you loved what I did, you loved my proposal, you loved me, why didn't you come back and talk to me? So price is an answer, but not always the answer.
Okay, so we got to get out of the building, right? So we got to go actually talk to our customer. One person's got to go do that. They try to need to remove as much of the bias as possible, I think is what you said.
Yes.
Right? You're going to have some bias, at least recognize.
Of course.
Okay, got it.
Of
All
course.
right, so what's next?
And then taking that information, looking at it from an individual standpoint, but then also now look at it on an aggregated basis. So it's qualitative data. So it's not 50% of the people said, right? You can use those numbers, but you have to be careful. But ultimately, you're looking for commonality. What did they say? You talk to 10 people, 15 people, 14 of them said X, Y, Z. Okay, we've got something we can hang our hat on. If you've got 15 people saying 15 different things, either it's not important or you've confused them because that was part of your value proposition and they're not understanding it. So it's really taking that data and dissecting it down. I like to use the terms deconstruction. So we deconstruct it. We look at all the different pieces, we kind of group them all together, and then we reconstruct them to reveal, the good, the bad, and the ugly, so to speak. And so that's But again, if one person or somebody's taking that data and handing it to a second person, it's like when I do mine, when I do interviews, for example, or I have someone else, it's always consistent. And then somebody else completely goes back and analyzes them. So because I don't want to introduce my bias because I heard something I thought was really important, but maybe it really wasn't if somebody else was listening to it. So I have a brand strategist, for example, that does all that constructing and deconstructing and kind of putting it all together. Then it comes back to us to determine, how are we going to message and how we're going to take that forward. So those are, kind of the, peek under my tent, if you will, of what the kind of my approach and the way I think it's really important.
So Anthony, let's say that you're a founder and you're going out into the world and you've got an idea, you got this.
So a stretch. I got to stretch here. All right. I got to imagine. All right. I'm a founder. I'm in. Okay. All right, go.
Let's say that you're going out and starting to do customer research, and we've talked so much on the podcast already about how important it is to get out of the building, go talk to potential customers, go talk to real customers, talk to your competitor, talk to everybody that'll talk to you. How do you approach that with the notion that there is bias, and then how do you try to gather that information, particularly from a founder's perspective, because you could argue that the founder is the worst person to go do that research. They're the person with the most vested.
I agree. If you're gonna go the cheap route, which I often do, and not hire an expert, let's talk about the real basics here. If you're gonna go out and talk to customers, your first mistake is to tell the people that you're talking to that you're the founder. That's the worst thing you can do.
Are you asking for a friend? This is
yeah. Because nobody's gonna want to tell you your baby's ugly. The next worst thing that you can do is tell them, you can't lead the witness. This is why it's so hard for a founder, because you're so close to it. One, and two, it's so difficult for you to explain the thing that you're thinking about doing in very simple terms. Because you need to be separate from it. You need to be able to almost be a psychopath if you're a founder, because you need to be able to completely distance yourself, your emotion, yourself from the research that you're doing. That I think it's actually, unless you're Hitler, you're not going to be able to do that. You're not going to be able to separate your emotions from the thing you're talking about. And by the way, I know a couple of founders that are that way. So the first two things are next to impossible. Let's see. So you get there. Then you just ask very simple questions. Like the best way to do it is not even talk about your product. Ask the person to walk them through their job or their day or the thing that they care about or what their pain is, and ask them to describe the things that you're trying to solve before you give them the solution. And then ask them how they would solve it. So you're looking for like Angelo said, commonalities, things that you hear again and again and again. Before you get into solution, you have to really understand. Best case scenario is actually feel the pain that your target customer is feeling.
So, Angelo, I think I've got it to this point. We know that we've got to focus on the customer. We know now that we've got to get out of the building, go talk to as many of these customers as possible. But let's take the next logical step. So now I've kind of understood the pain points. I understand maybe a little bit of the positioning, what customers think about me, what they think about my product and service. I now need to craft a messaging framework. I need to go out and start messaging this into the marketplace. I know founders that have gone through these first steps perfectly, but the moment they get a pen in their hand, they freeze. They can't actually write something down. Can you help us break it down? What are the building components of a messaging strategy? How do I start thinking about this?
Well, for me, it's about, what are we trying to accomplish? We have all this insight now. And so am I trying to, based on what we've discovered, change your perception of us? Am I trying to drive you to our website? Am I trying to convince you to demo our product or take? So part of it is, what do I want them to do? What's the action that I need them to take? We didn't talk about, the people in the hierarchy, right? If I'm selling I have to sell to the engineer, I have to sell to the CFO, and those are all different messages. All right, the CFO is not going to get lost in all the techie stuff. So understanding how I need to craft that and structure that, like go back to this, one of my clients in the manufacturing business, we do outsource manufacturing. We target engineers, procurement, finance, and executives. Same company, 4 different messages. So I'm looking for things that are relevant to them, that makes them want to engage. And then the other side of that is, what do I want them to do once they engage? Well, call the salesperson, fill out a form, invite us to bid on a project. So ultimately, I have to know what I want you to do, and I have to look at where my issues are. So if I'm, repositioning the company, I need to be building that awareness of, why we're moving in that direction, what's the change. If I'm trying to sell you a product or get you to engage, I have to talk about the benefits to you, how you're the value prop, if you will, that you're going to get by using us, and, all the reasons why. And again, these can't be, 40-page documents, right? They're short little blurbs, if you will, that try to people don't read. Attention span is horrible. And so how do I get you to do something? And now I'm a firm believer that if you think about, you have to play cards and ante, right? Your website's your ante. You got to have a great website. Anthony said this earlier. Spend all this time, money, and energy. We just spent a lot of money, get these people to our website, and they get there and go, I'm lost. I have no idea what's going on. And, all the latest whiz bang things, and I can't figure it out. I actually worked with a company in the website development business, doing everything we just talked about to get them focused on enterprise stuff. But I struggled with their website. As I go there, I don't know what you're trying to sell me. I got these lights and green things flying all over the place. Why? You're just confusing me, right? But they're thinking it was creative, but it was confusing the market. Anyway, I digress. So
I think you hit 2 really very interesting points. And Anthony, the first one is the notion of goal, of having a goal of what it is you're doing, and particularly within the messaging framework, starting with understanding what is it you're trying to do. So if I have an understanding of my customer, we see this all the time in the startup world, where people will come in and be like, well, my goal is to sell the product. It's like, well, you don't sell it just magically. Like, there are a series of steps you need to go through. Like, does that resonate with you, Anthony? And I think we've probably seen it a few times. How do you coach people into actually breaking down the sales process? And then the second one is that relevance component. Like, how do you coach through that relevance?
Having a goal, I think the goal of being fundamentally, founders, all they care about is growing profitable revenue, right? So that's like the no shit goal. Right. Yeah. Okay. Got it. But how? It's about how. How are we gonna get you to that profitable revenue? And the answer is, let me put it a different way. So a company, I've talked about this before. Brand identity is really our small 8-pound brains not understanding how to understand a company. So we try to summarize a company into a personality, and that's why they call brands, a brand identity. You're trying to wrap your head around this amorphous thing, into a personality. And what a messaging framework is what you're doing is you're saying, how does this person that I'm trying to identify talk? What do they say? How do they establish trust? How do I understand them quickly? And so you're basically, initially, you're trying to craft the first impression. And then you're trying to, when somebody digs in, you want that to be congruent. You want that first impression to match the relationship that you're going to have with the brand later. So messaging framework helps you organize what you want your customers to understand about you as first impression, second impression, and long-term relationship. So, of course, I think I diverted a little bit from the question, but I think
that's right, Angelo. So, yeah, I want to just redirect that to you and say, specifically, as a founder thinking through, okay, I understand this, but now what are the actual things that I need to have written up on a whiteboard, or as I start to build messaging, what are those things that you suggest that founders or early stage companies have?
Yeah, well, before I say that, Anthony said something that I think is really important in that first impression, the second impression. But this is where companies go awry is, they start off, here's my brand, here's what I'm trying to sell you. And the next thing you know, they're talking about stuff that doesn't make any sense, or they've deviated from the brand or the brand strategy or the messaging strategy. And I think it's too easy for that to happen. I find that, and some of, I kind of changed my model a little bit a couple of years ago because we spend months doing all the stuff we're talking about, and I'd hand it over and I'd sit there for a little while, work with their junior marketing person, and within 6 months, it looked nothing like what we started.
Yeah,
off
go
at.
the other direction.
Yeah, it just went sideways, and the owner let it happen. And so I think it's important again to kind of look at all those different pieces, a messaging framework, the foundational work that needs to be done, and to making sure that once you have that positioning and that core messaging. So I like to look at an overarching message. Here are the things that we want to have the market think of us. Then we break it down. If we're going to talk about the brand, we're going to talk about our service, we're going to talk about our product, we're going to talk about, whatever budgets or whatever it happens to be. Everything has to be rooted in that core messaging, all that foundational work. Otherwise, it's easy to go off on a tangent. We've all talked about this, chasing shiny pennies. It's easy to go, hey, that's a great thing I want to do, and I want to go run after that. In the meantime, you've abandoned all your principles because you think you saw something new. And so I'm saying you can't do that. You cannot do that, but you have to keep that core. Otherwise, you can, again, using the term brand, you can weaken the brand if you start to lose some of that core essence. And so again, I like to look at it as I use a process called laddering. And I look at kind of the functional benefits of whatever our product happens to be, for example. And then we kind of start to layer that kind of attributes up to the functional benefit, up to kind of the initial emotional connection, and ladder it up to how does it really benefit the person that's making the decision to hire or buy the product. And I think those connections are really important because at each stage you can understand, not just what the product does, but that value prop that it's delivering and the things that it's benefiting. And I think every one of those kind of messages has to connect on an emotional basis, especially in the B2B world. We don't think about emotional connections a lot of time in the B2B world, but years and years and years ago, it used to be, we treated business to businesses like, completely different group, right? If you were a business owner, you weren't a consumer. Well, we know that's not true, right? So we have to, I believe we have to take those approaches and making those connections. It's about loyalty. It's about confidence, about trust. And it gets beyond just product. I have to know that if I order something from you, I'm going to get it. It's going to do it what it's supposed to do. And, how do you communicate that? And that's important because if I know that this is important to 20 of you, it's going to be important to the rest of my market, and have to make sure that I communicate that.
I like it. So Anthony, I want to give you just one shot here, and then we'll go into the speed round. So as you think about that, we just talked about Angelo was saying about laddering. How do you approach that? What are some of the things that when you're building a brand, and I think you've built, I think by last count, 7 billion brands. You probably built 4 while we're on this call.
Three shy of 7 billion. So I've got a couple more to.
You got to get moving, man. Come on, slacker.
So I think of this as so I have components that I go through when I'm building a messaging architecture. The very most important thing we talked about the audience. I need to describe the audience and what their pain is. And then I define voice, tone, a tagline, a 1-sentence description, a long description. So if I'm going to use an example, I'll just use our podcast as an example. All right. So if I'm creating a message, we've done this actually for How to Founder. So our audience, really quite simple. It's entrepreneurs and founders or aspiring founders. The pain is it's lonely. It's really lonely being an entrepreneur and a founder. And it's really hard because there's no reference manual to tell you how to do it. Our voice, I like to, when you talk about voice is for me is like what famous person would you want to hear from on like how does this famous person talk? I always, for us, like I kind of use Richard Branson as our voice, and tone is really a result of how we come across. So Chris and I think of entrepreneurship as a blue collar job. So Chris and I, our tone is casual and blue collar. And then we have a tagline and a 1 sentence description, a long description, but those components kind of, if you're able to articulate those, and then you can build off of all of those as you're developing your copy, your website copy, your advertising, you can develop off of those things and even feed all of that into an AI, ChatGPT, and say, all right, help me write copy to this audience, with this pain, with this voice, with this tone. Here's our tagline. And you can get some things that need editing, but at least you have a starting point. So those are the components how I think about them, Chris.
I like it. Angelo, agree? You want to add or delete any of those along the way?
No, I agree. Everything he just said is in my framework as well, and I think it's important. Again, it helps define, who the company is, what they are, and it's important, right? Whether it's a friendly tone or a authoritative or whatever it happens to be. I mean, again, understanding who the audience is important. Otherwise, you come off as brash and cocky, and they're looking for, friendliness and feeling comfortable, they're not going to match. And so
why were you looking at me when you said brash and cocky, Angelo?
Yeah.
I mean, guilty as charged. All right, let's go into this speed round, Angelo. So here's what we do. I'm going to ask you a question. Of course, it's every one of these probably is going to be, it depends. But I just wanted you, from your gut take, like what's working? What have you seen most working most recently? So are you ready for this speed round, Angelo?
Depends.
We desperately depends. That is the correct answer. Well done. In your messaging that you've been developing, being very clear and direct or witty or funny, what's better?
For the clients I've had, it's been clear and direct.
Broad appealing marketing or very specific niche marketing to individual people?
Very specific.
As a founder, should I hire an agent? And this is a setup for you. Should I hire a professional at this, or should I try to do this myself?
Well, of course, I'm going to say hire a professional.
Yeah, I think that's right. Should I focus more on direct and feedback, or should I focus more on my intuition and gut as a founder?
Oh, feedback for sure.
So actual data. This has been great. Okay, Anthony, what have you learned? What have you taken away from this conversation?
Bumper stickers that I have for today, Chris, is focus on the customer's pain over your product. Clarity over cleverness is what I wrote down. Define the problem crystal clearly. Like it has to be very in focus what the problem is. And consistency, you don't want to present your customers with a different personality every time they interact with you. So a consistent voice equals consistent trust.
Very good stuff. Some deep dive recommendations. And Angelo, if you have any, just to jump in here, Ogilvy on advertising, probably
amazing
the most
book.
important book that's ever been written on, particularly copy editing is true. They're the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing by Al Ries and Jack Trout. Competitive Advantage by Michael Porter. There's a great article by Harvard Business Review called The Power of Unified Messaging in Dynamic Markets. Any that you like to pay attention to, Angelo?
You actually named quite a few. I have to say, just outside, but from a marketing and strategy standpoint, I'm a big fan of Jim Collins. Could be great.
Yeah, I mean, what a terrific book. Also, he, at least at one time, lived in Boulder. I don't know if he still does. Is he still in Colorado? Jim, call me. Call me. He doesn't return my calls. It's weird. Thank you so much for joining us, Angelo. Where can we learn more about you? Where can we find you? Where can we find your good information and sign up immediately for your services?
Sure. The best place is LinkedIn. You can find me there. It has links to my website. On my website, there's videos, there's free resources, free mini marketing course that I worked with a guy on, working on a bigger one, but it's there. So, and then a lot of blogs. We blog couple times a month with newsletters. For 4.5 years, I did my own podcast. I took a 90-day break 2 years ago, so haven't quite been back to it.
It's funny because our listeners want us to take a 90-day break. They've been asking.
It's the only show where listeners say, "Can you guys take a break?
Can you guys just do less?" We'd appreciate that. Angelo, thanks so much for the time. Appreciate it. Anthony, what do we have coming up?
So coming up, actually, in like 15 minutes, we're talking to our friend Nick Jane, where we're doing a founder spotlight with Nick. A new segment we're calling 5 Questions. Really looking forward to that. But later this week, we're going to talk about how to find co-founders. And to tune in to us, just go to howtofounder.com. And you can listen to us on YouTube and LinkedIn Live, but also we're on Spotify and Apple and all of those. I can't express to you guys, thank you so much for tuning in and supporting the show. The support has been overwhelming. So thank you everybody for the great feedback on the show. Angelo, thank you so very much for joining us and
thank you guys
and providing some great insights on messaging architecture. Take care, guys. Bye.